Hello, I'm Jennifer Lee, Admin Evangelist at Salesforce, and welcome to my new series, Automate This. And yes, I'm here live from my home studio in Boston, Massachusetts, where I will be coming to you live every month. And if you missed the live stream, no worries, you can catch this on video on demand back here where you found me. Thank you for joining me on my first episode of Automate This. So let me set the stage. With Automate This, admins can hear how and be inspired by trailblazers who solve real-world business problems with automation. You can also learn about and discuss best practices and automation topics that are top of mind for admins, and ask questions and interact live with the presenters as well as the audience. So I'm looking forward to guest presenters, Flownatics, Flow experts, who we will have on the series to talk all things automation with a focus this year on record-triggered flows, given the future retirement of workflow rules and processes. The video on demand will also be accompanied by a blog post where we will deep dive into what you saw. The best way to be notified when we go live is to subscribe. So hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. And we will also be posting upcoming sessions on all our various social channels. Since live streaming is very new to me, I want to hear from you. So I'll have a survey at the end. Please share with me what you liked and what you want to see more of. So to interact with the audience, post your comments on YouTube. If you want to interact with me, start your question with Q:, so I can quickly scan through and identify your questions for the Q&A section later on. Are you tired of those post-it notes to remind you to add or remove users from permission sets? Have you ever considered automating user management tasks? Well, we're going to cover how you can automatically assign and remove permission sets from users. So let's have Salesforce do the work for us. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get started. We're going to lay this out in 3 steps to your automation success. You need to document a process, understand the process, and then build the process. Don't go into Salesforce to start configuring your automation until you've done the first 2 steps. The more work you do upfront in understanding and documenting the process, the less rework you'll have later on as you configure your automation. Hashtag work smart, not hard. All right, so let's understand the process. This is where you ask questions to understand the steps of the process, and you ask your 5 whys, because we know that's an effective and simple way to get to the underlying root cause of the problem. Now, our scenario here is pretty straightforward, where we're automating steps that are fairly routine. But it's still important to understand the manual steps first. So what we're going to do is take a look at the manual steps of assigning and removing a permission set from a user. So let's go into Salesforce. All right, so we're going to first find the user that we want to assign a permission set to. So we're in setup and I'm doing a search on the user. And Jarrett Dunn is of course not showing up. So we're going to click on Jarrett Dunn. There he is. And let me just refresh and do that again. And this is the beauty of live streaming. All right. Okay, let's navigate to Jarrett Dunn's user record. And all right. Okay. I'm going to log in again. All right, it's coming up. And now we're going to go in Setup. Okay. Now, let's search for Jared Dunn. Okay, it's slowly coming up. There it is. All right. So we navigate to Jared Dunn, and then we're going to go to Edit Assignments. And not that one. Hold on. Okay, Permission Set Assignments, Edit Assignments. So once the UI shows up, it's having stage fright. You'll see a list of all the available permission sets. Great. Okay, you'll see all the available permission sets that we could assign Jared, and he already has a permission set assigned to him. So the UI restricts it and only allows you to assign permission sets that aren't already assigned to Jared. So we're going to hit save, cross our fingers that it doesn't take forever. And this should add the permission set to Jared once it takes its time. And there you go. So Jared's assigned to the permission set. So if we wanted to remove a permission set from the user, we do the same thing. We navigate to the user's record. So in this case, Jared Dunn. And you could delete a permission set by clicking on DEL. And it only allows you to delete the permission sets already assigned to Jared. Or we can go back to Edit Assignments. And we'll see that we can only remove permission sets that are already assigned to Jared. So we click here and hit remove and save. And once we hit save, that should remove the permission set from Jared. Awesome. All right, so your automation or flow needs to accommodate for those UI restrictions that I just covered, or else your flow will fail. So before you could assign a permission set, you need to ensure that the user is already assigned to that permission set. And because the user is already assigned to the permission set in our image here, Cloudy says no to flow. And before you could remove a permission set, you need to ensure that the user is already assigned to that permission set. So since the user already has that permission set in the image, Astro tells the flow it could remove the permission set. Now let's understand the object relationship. User and permission sets are objects. The user objects holds the records for your users. The permission set objects holds all the permission sets in your org. The permission set assignment object is a junction object that holds the record that ties the user to a specific permission set. So here the assignee ID is the user ID, and the permission set ID is the ID of the permission set you're looking to assign to that user. All right. So before we log into Salesforce and start building our automation in Flow Builder, I found it helpful to think out the steps logically on paper before we get hands-on keyboard. And here's where we document the process, the steps. So first, we need to understand the criteria to automatically assign or remove a permission set from a user. So for our business requirements, when a finance user is added to Salesforce, we automatically add the ABC permission set. But if a user leaves the finance department and moves over to the sales division, we'll automatically remove that ABC permission set from the user. So let's document that business process. So here we're going to start off with a new user or change to an existing user. We're going to determine whether it's a new finance user or the user used to be part of the finance department. Then if it's a new user, we're going to assign a permission set to that user. And if the user is no longer part of finance, we're going to remove the permission set from the user. So let's take a closer look at the documented steps for assigning a user to a permission set. So first we need to identify the permission set. And we know the permission set by its name, but for Flow's purposes, it needs to know the permission set ID. And we get the ID by looking at the details of the permission set record. And a quick sidebar, awesome admins do not hardcode IDs. So it's a bad practice, so let's not do it. For more information, check out my blog post on the admin website. All right, so our next step is to determine whether the permission set was found that we did a search on. Now, if we did find a permission set, the next step is to find the user permission set assignment combination. And next we have a decision, did we find that user and is that user already assigned to that permission set? Because in order to assign a permission set, we can't already have that user be assigned. So if it's not, then we're going to assign the user to the permission set. Now let's take a look at the actual flow elements that we will create. So we're going to do a get records to find the permission set and store the ID. Next step, we're going to have a decision, and that's going to check to see if that permission set was found in the get records. Next, during another get records, and this is to find that user permission set record combination. Next, we have another decision, and this is to determine whether we found that record in the get records. And lastly, we're going to do a create records in that permission set assignment with the user permission set combination. All right, so let's take a look at removing a permission set and the steps to do that. So again, we're going to look at the permission set, find the permission set, and store the ID. And again, we're going to check if that permission set was found. And if it was, again, we're going to look for that user permission set assignment combination. And again, we're going to check to see if the user is already assigned. Now remember, we can't remove the permission set unless the user is assigned to the permission set. So assuming that user is, then we're going to remove the user from the permission set. So here we're going to do a get records. Next, we're going to have a decision to make sure that we found something in the get records. Next, we're doing another get records to find the record with the user and permission set combo. Next, we have another decision to determine whether we found a record in the second get records. And then lastly, we are going to do a delete records here of that permission set assignment. All right. Okay, so while we can design each process to have its own flow, did you notice what's common between the two processes? All right, and I'm hoping that folks recognize what's common. There are 4 steps. All right, so an even better design that we can go through is to consolidate the steps into one set of the 4 steps. And this will allow us to build it once, maintain it once, and leverage it over and over again. So it goes back to my hashtag work smart, not hard. All right, so one more thing before we go into Flow Builder, and I know you're all anxious to start building. What are the pieces of information we need to know, or our inputs, so Salesforce can automatically assign and remove those permission sets from the user? So first, we need to know who the user is, what the permission set is, and then what are we doing with that permission set, so adding or removing. And then we're going to store these text values into 3 separate variables. All right, I know some of you are already thinking, what's a variable? So a variable is a temporary container that holds a piece of information for use somewhere later in Flow or to be passed off somewhere outside of Flow. I think of it as a Tupperware container. So our Flow will need 5 containers. And I name my variables using a certain naming convention. So I start all my variables with VAR lowercase, and then I camel case whatever the item is. So my first variable is var user ID, and that will hold the user ID. Var permission set name will hold the API name or developer name of the permission set. Var permission set action will hold either the value add or remove, which reflects what we want to do with the permission set. And we will use the permission set developer name to find the permission set ID because, as I mentioned before, awesome admins do not hard code IDs in their automation. So if we find a permission set, we will store the ID in a variable called var permission set ID. Otherwise, we're going to keep the variable empty, which signifies there was no permission set found. Another valuable piece of information we will get within our process is whether the user is already signed to a permission set. And we'll hold this in a variable called var does user have permission set. And if it's true, we will store the assignee ID. Otherwise, we'll hold the variable as empty, signifying that the user doesn't have that permission set. So again, we will have a total of 5 variables that we will hold important information for use to make informed decisions or to take action on within our flow. So now that we have that squared away, let's take a look at how we build this in Flow Builder. Now you notice how long it took before we even went into Salesforce to do our configuration? All right, so we're going to create an auto launch flow, which means this is a flow that will fire when something else triggers it. In our case, this will be triggered by a record triggered flow. So more on that in a little bit. So let me get out of the slide presentation and go into Salesforce. And I'm just going to reload the page real quick. All right, and it's taking its little time. Okay, let's get this. Exit out and come back in. All right, come on, Salesforce. All right, so let's open up the auto launch flow. So in the essence of time, I already built it, and I'll just quickly walk through, hopefully quickly, walk through the flow. coming along. Okay, so the first thing we're going to step through are the 5 variables that we need to create. So to create a variable, you go into this Manager tab, click New Resource, and click Variable, give it a name. So that's when you use var user ID. Always give it a description, because even though you're building it, someone else later on might need to enhance it or troubleshoot it, so it's good to know what that variable is for. And then the data types, if you've created a field, it's very similar in terms of the data types. Just know that a Boolean is a checkbox. So I'm going to cancel out of this because we've already configured our text variables. So the first one we'll cover off on is var user ID. And this is data type text, and I made it available for input. And that's because our record triggered flow will be pushing data from the record triggered flow into this auto launch flow. Our second variable is var permission set name, and this is the API name of the permission set. This will again be passed from our record triggered flow, so we want to make it available for input, and the data type is text. Our third variable is var permission set action. And this is where we're passing from our record triggered flow either the word add or remove. And again, it's a text template, and I'm making it available for input because our record trigger flow will push that data in. Our fourth text variable is the permission set ID. And this will hold the permission set ID when we query the permission set object using the value in the var permission set name. So in this case, we're only using this within our process, so we don't need to make it available for input or output. And our last and fifth variable is var user has permission set. And this will store the assignee ID when we query the permission set assignment object. Remember, that's a junction object for the user and permission set, and a value is found. All right, so that's our 5 variables. Now let's step through the flow. First, we're going to do a lookup on the permission set object where the name equals the API name of the permission set. Again, this is passed from our record triggered flow into our auto launch flow. We're going to stop at the first record found. And what we're going to do here is choose fields, assign variables. I only care about this ID field, which I want to assign to the variable var permission set ID. And here I'm checking the box so that if no records were returned, that I will set that variable to empty or null. In the next step, I have a decision, and my outcome I'm calling permission set ID found. And here I'm checking that the value in the variable var permission set ID is now false. So 2 negatives equal a positive. That means it found the ID. And my default is no permission set found. So my process will only continue if I found a permission set ID, because I can't do an assignment. So it's not worth going on with the process because eventually it will fail, right? So we're assuming we found the ID. Our next step is to do a get records. Oops. And here we're querying the permission set assignment. And let me open this back up again so that the right values show up. Oops. Okay, let me just do a quick refresh and see. So essentially what that does a query of the permission set assignment where the assignee ID equals the value in the variable var user ID, and the permission set ID is the variable var permission set ID. So it's looking for that combination of the user and permission set. And while we're waiting, let me see if there are questions from the audience that I could answer while we're waiting for Salesforce to come back up. All right, so there's a question here. How could I reference custom metadata in Flow? So when you set up your custom metadata, and I'm not going to be able to show this while this refreshes, what you need to do is to do a get records of your custom metadata record and store it, and then you could reference it in your Flow. So hopefully that answers your question. And let me see if there are any other questions out there. I see, Paul, you had a question about what object or field are you using as an indicator trigger for the department change. We will be looking at the users, the department field in the user's record. All right, let me see if I can go back here. If that will let me, oh, nope. And if you have any additional questions while we wait, start with the letter Q and colon so I can easily locate those questions. And we, of course, did not run into this with all the test runs that we did. So let me open this back up and see if we can get a connection here. All right, so as I mentioned, we would query the permission set assignment where the assignee ID equals the user ID and the permission set ID is the ID we did from our first get records. We're going to stop at the first record found. And here I only care about the assignee ID, and I'm going to assign it to the var user has permission set. And here again, I check the box that if no records are returned, that we will specify the variables as null or empty. The next step, we're going to check to see if we found a record, right? And we're going to look to see what we're planning on doing with that permission set. So here I have a add path, no permission set. So remember, we're trying to add a permission set here, but we need to make sure the user doesn't already have that permission set, right? Because we don't want our flow to fail. We can't have duplicate user permission set records. So both conditions here need to be met. Var user has permission set is null true, so the user doesn't have a permission set, and var permission set action passed from the record triggered flow is the word add. Our other path is the remove path has permission set. So here again we need both conditions to be met. Var user has permission set is null false, so two negatives equal a positive. That means the user has a permission set, and therefore we could only remove the permission set if the user already has it, right? And var permission set action equals remove. So following the add path, we will create a record in the permission set assignment junction object where the assignee ID equals the variable var user ID, and permission set ID, var permission set ID. If we follow the remove path, it's the opposite of create records. Now we're deleting the record, right? So again, we're looking at the permission set assignment junction object, and assignee ID equals the user ID, and the permission set ID equals the value that's held in the var permission set ID. All right, so don't forget to test this using the flow debugger, and then activate your auto launch flow so that it could be called from your record triggered flow. Now I'm going to see if I'm going to be daring and see if we could even do debug. Oh, let's see. All right. But what debugger allows you to do if you haven't used it already is it allows you to set various scenarios and then test it without having to go into a record and make changes and then see that your flow is actually working as expected. So here, because we have the auto launch flow that is set up to have 3 inputs, it's allowing those fields to show up. So here, let's say the action is add. We want to add a permission set, and I'm going to provide the permission set API name. So this is the ABC permission set, and then the user record. So we're going to head back over to Jarrett Dunn's user record, and we're going to take it from the URL. And let me find the debugger. Okay. All right, so we're going to add the ABC permission set to Jarrett Dunn's user record. And let me just make sure that he doesn't already have it. Great. Okay, and then we're going to hit run. So this is when Flow goes through and tries to evaluate the process. And you see the little orange indicators indicating that this is the path that my flow took based on the inputs that I provided. So here we passed off into our interview the API name for the permission set. We passed word add, and then Jarrett Dunn's ID, user ID. Then this goes through each step of the flow, so you can get details as to what is being passed and what is happening at every step of your flow. So here we have the get records, lookup permission set ID. We're passing in the developer name for the permission set, and we were able to find the record, and we're storing that ID in the var permission set ID. Next up, we're at the decision, which is here. So it executed the outcome permission set ID found because we found the ID. So that variable is now false, means there was a value. Next, we're doing a get records, which is over here. And here we're looking at the permission set assignment object where the assignee ID equals Jared's ID and the permission set ID equals the ID that we just found. So it didn't find a record because Jared's not assigned to the ABC permission set. Next step is the decision, which is over here. And we're told that the outcome executed is add path no permission set. So the variable var user has permission set is null, so that's true. So that passed. And then var permission set action add equals add. So both passes, so that means we're going down this path here to our last step, which is create records. So we're creating one permission set assignment record, assignee ID equals Jared's ID, and the permission set ID equals the ID we found in that first get records. So what you would do is you would go through the remove path, like the happy path, right? And go through the remove path, go through other paths that you don't even expect to launch this auto launch flow. So you want to do negative testing as well as positive testing. And then once that's complete, you want to go and activate your auto launch flow. And with a modularized flow, which is basically what we created, we can now create our trigger to fire the process of assigning or removing permission sets to and from a user. So again, hashtag work smart, not hard. We build it once, we maintain it once, we reuse it over and over again. All right, so to recap what we just created, let's go back to our documented process. So when a new finance user or user has left finance, we want a permission set to either be assigned or removed. The action to be taken with the permission set is done by invoking the auto launch flow that we just created. In the case of a new finance user, a permission set is assigned. If the user is no longer a finance user, a permission set will be removed. And there are 3 inputs that we're passing into this auto launch flow: the user, the API name of the permission set, and the action, whether add or remove, the action we want to be done with that permission set. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be using a record triggered flow to trigger that auto launch flow. Now, we need to specify the criteria to auto assign or remove that permission set from a user. So when a finance user is added to Salesforce, the ABC permission set is assigned, invoking the auto launch flow, and the existing user leaves finance department, the ABC permission set is removed, again invoking that auto launch flow. And the only difference are the 3 inputs we're passing to tell the auto launch flow what to do. All right, so now I'm going to go into this record triggered flow, and we're just going to do a refresh and see what happens. All right, fingers crossed. This record triggered flow is automation that is executed by a change to record. So in our case, when a user record is created or edited. So here in the start section, we have the user object. When a record is created or edited, I have custom condition logic that needs to be met before we continue on with our record triggered flow. So I need for the first 2 to evaluate to true, so the department is changed true. The user's department does not equal finance, so this is the case where the user was previous finance and left, or the department equals finance. And I've selected to optimize my flow for actions and related records because I'm not dealing with updates to the user record that fired off the process. We're auto launching a flow. So we're going to run immediately, and I have my first decision. So I have 2 outcomes. Either it's a new finance user using a formula resource, and I will open that up in a little bit, equals to true, or we have an existing user previously finance department, and all 3 of these conditions need to be met. So the user is active, so that's true. The user's previous department is finance, and the user's department is changed. So the user's current department has changed. So going to the formula for our that signifies a new finance user. Its flow formulas are very similar to formulas you see everywhere else in Salesforce. So we're using the syntax is new for a new record, and the user's department is finance. So those 2 need to be evaluate to true for it to signify a new finance user. So assuming we're going down the outcome new finance user, we're going to invoke a subflow. And this is how you go about that. Under add element, it's under interaction, and then you hit subflow. Then you start fast typing the name of your subflow. Since we only have one auto launch flow available that has the add name, that automatically comes up. And then when you select it, you provide a label, tab over for the API name, provide a description. You can also open up your auto launch flow directly from this flow versus exiting and then navigating to it. So by default, all 3 inputs will be set to not include. And what we're going to do in the one that we configured is we're going to set it to include because we're going to pass that from our record triggered flow. So in this record triggered flow. So we're passing in this variable, we're going to add, and then this is the API name for our permission set. And here $record indicates the record that fired off our record triggered flow. So in this case, it's the user record, and we're looking specifically to pass off the ID as the variable var user ID. And the other path is the user was previously part of the finance department. We're invoking the same auto launch flow, right? The only difference here is we're passing the word remove instead of add. So in this case, we want to remove the permission set from the user. All right, so again, you do want to do all your testing of this record triggered flow and do as much as you can in the debugger versus having to go out and make changes to the record and activating this to make sure it tests out. So we're going to hit debug. And for record triggered flows, if you have scheduled paths, so scheduled paths are similar to scheduled actions in a process builder, for example. So if you had a scheduled path in your record trigger flow, which we don't have here, you can run your debug on the scheduled path. We're going to start skip start conditions, and we're going to pretend that we're running this off of a newly created record, and we're looking at Jared's record. So here you could specify a user record you want to use for testing purposes. So we're going to hit run. All right, and here we have our conditions where it indicated in our decision that this is a new finance user. So our formula evaluated to true. So in our debugger, we said we created a new record, and if we go back to Jared Dunn's user record, his department is finance. So both evaluated to true in our formula. Then, because we're going down this path, we're invoking the auto launch flow. So here you have the start of our auto launch flow, add a permission set, and it included all the steps that we already ran through in our auto launch flow in the debugger. So you could go through and take a look at all the steps, and this basically ends that auto launch flow. So again, you go ahead and do all your various testing, make sure it works, even the negative testing. So anything that doesn't fall into that criteria, you want to make sure that it doesn't even execute this flow. And once you are done with validating your testing, then you want to activate your record triggered flow. All right, so as additional scenarios come up for automatically assigning or removing a permission set, you can then create a new record triggered flow that invokes the auto launch flow as subflow. Now that's a lot that we unpacked. Now let's transition to the Q&A section. Great. So please start your questions with Q:, so I can easily identify those questions from the chat that the audience is posting. And we're going to give it a couple of seconds for me to look through, and then I'll be right back. All right. Okay, let's take this question. How could I update a record type using a developer name instead of the ID field with a record triggered flow? Record type. So first, you would need to do a get records in the record type object to get, using the developer name, basically to get the ID. And then from there, once you have the ID, you can then reference it in your record triggered flow to do any type of assignment. So I hope that helps. All right. So Christy, hey Christy, her question is, am I correct that you use a formula because the decision itself can't account for is new? And yes, you're totally correct. And that's, so normally if I was able to access in the conditions piece, the is new piece, I wouldn't have to go through the formula, but that was a workaround since that's not available. So thanks, Christy, for your question. All right, so again, if there's any questions, use the Q colon and I will answer them. And I'm just going to do a quick scan just to make sure that I've answered all the questions that have been posted so far. All right, and I think I did. Awesome. Oops. Okay. All right, so let's recap what we learned. The 3 steps to building automation success is to understand the process, document the process, to reinforce understanding in alignment with business stakeholders, and then build your automation. Now, we also learned that a variable is nothing but a temporary container that holds information for use in your flow or information you're passing out of your flow. We also learned to not repeat steps in different flows, but to build it once, maintain it once, and leverage it several times with subflows. Hashtag work smart, not hard. That should be our motto for this year. And lastly, we built our first record triggered flow. Woo-hoo! So now it's your turn. Engage with others in the Trailblazer community, Salesforce automation. Also, visit our automation resource page on admin.salesforce.com, where you'll get access to all the automation, cool content that our team has created. And lastly, get hands-on on Trailhead. We just launched the new record triggered flows module, so get out there and get that module, and please share with us when you do. And thank you for joining me for my first Automate This session and for coming along this live stream journey with me. I hope you had fun. I know I did too, despite the little tech glitches, but you know, it's live stream, right? So thank you so much for your engagement. And now talk to me. Tell me what you think. Complete the quick survey over here and let me know what you liked and what you want to see more of. Now, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you will know when we go live, as well as access our other awesome video content. And I'll see you next month for another live stream of Automate This. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.